Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by an experienced technical recruiter with a diverse background in the industries and teams across the Berlin ecosystem, from companies like Heaven HR through to Ecosia. As an energetic, reliable, and empathetic recruiter, she strives to build long-lasting relationships in all that she does, which, for me, is one of the cornerstones of what makes a great recruiter. Her topic is one that I cannot wait to dive in. Personally, I think it is one of the most crucial components to a successful hiring process. If we get it right, hiring, simple, walk in the park. If we get it wrong, then it's going to feel like you're pulling your teeth out. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, recruiting specialist Roslyn Glover. So thank you so much for joining.
Oh, my pleasure, Eden. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll get into the nitty-gritty part in a moment. And like I said, kind of allude to what the title shares about harmonizing with hiring managers, as well as obviously what my introduction kind of also suggested. But we'll get into that. But before we do, let's start off with the little teaser, as it were. So everyone gets the question at the beginning of each episode, more of kind of just a high level, shall we say. So for yourself, how do you think recruitment is going to change in the next 12 months?
That's an excellent first question, Eden. I do think that recruitment is going to change in the next 12 months. Sort of like what we talked about yesterday is the way people are hiring these days and what they are looking for with candidates. I do think a lot of companies right now are really looking into not so much of a competency hiring, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Competency. Oh my gosh, words are hard. But going more into skills-based hiring because the competition has gotten tremendously high with all the layoffs that are happening right now. I do think a lot of recruiters are really taking a step back to thinking, what are we looking for with each of these candidates? What are the processes that we can do to make sure that we find the right candidate, or the rock star, as some people like to say. So I do think we are going to be getting into even more of an in-depth territory about being more selective about what we are looking for with candidates, going more into a deeper dive with what we're expecting with the technical aspect, with the experience aspect. So I do think we're going to definitely dive into being more selective with what we are looking for with candidates. And I'm definitely seeing a lot more with that right now, particularly in Berlin. So I can definitely see that being a continuation this year.
Yeah, no, I agree tremendously. I think the last 12 months have highlighted, obviously with the lack of money moving around, people being a little bit more, instead of just looking for 80, 90%, we're looking for 100, 110%. And I think going into next year, or the next 12 months at least anyways, I do believe we're only going to become more competitive. We're still,
Absolutely.
we're not in the thick of what we were last year, shall we say. There are more jobs opening, which is fantastic. And for anyone's listening, we're recording in May. Yep, May 24. I had to work out what month we're in. So we're in May 24. So if I'm wrong and you're listening to this in June or July, then I'll hold my hands up. Or if you're listening to this in the future, then hopefully it worked out well for everyone. Let's see that one. But right now, it's we're not in the thick of it, but we're slowly starting to see a turn. But I think you're right. Genuinely, the market is it's going to be an employer-led market for some time. They have the power, they have the control. So yeah, Gillian, shall we say?
It's an interesting time right now to look for a job right now, regardless of where you are. Since we are based in Berlin, I think it's gotten even more competitive. But, I do have friends that are based in the US. I actually have a friend that was thinking about looking into, new opportunities with, UX designing. And, she just decided to, send out a few applications just to see what the market is like, and she didn't hear back at all. So I think people are starting to just really focus on what they are wanting to have with these particular positions. And then, like I said before, the competition is extremely high right now. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it since
Horrendous.
I started.
I'll be
Yeah.
transparent. It's horrendous. Yeah, I think as well. I would hazard a guess if you was to poll a large portion of the market, anonymized. I guarantee there'll be a lot more people who are actually looking or want to move, but there's
Mm,
hesitation to move because one, they can't be bothered with the competition. Two, they don't want to have the risk of potentially being on the market if things don't work out. So I think once I can't say get back to normality because we don't know what normality is going to be, but I think we're going to see a huge seismic shift in people moving jobs. We saw it at the end of COVID. I'd say at the end of COVID,
absolutely.
during after the worst part of COVID, shall we say? I think we're due that again, genuinely, because I reach out to a lot of people, and I hear so many people are open minded to at least speak to me. Um, and even if they're not, being sent for opportunities, they want to hear, they want to know what's happening in that market. So the moment it turns, I think we're going to see a huge shift. So things like what we're talking about today, harmonizing with our hiring managers, is only going to make the talent acquisitions job even more important. So the title says harmonizing. I'm going to change the structure slightly because we also said the word healthy yesterday when we kind of did the prep for this. So set the scene. What exactly makes one a harmonious relationship, or if we want to get to the other side, a healthy relationship with our hiring managers?
I think there's definitely a lot of different steps that we can take to make sure that we have a healthy relationship with the hiring manager or hiring managers, depending on how many positions you are overlooking. I think the number one thing that really comes to mind is communication, setting the stage of different ways of how to communicate with the hiring manager so you don't have to wait for a very long time to hear back from them. So my suggestion would be to always, schedule designated times on when you can catch up with the hiring manager, whether they prefer doing calls or Slack messages. I've also participated in a few Slack groups where I'm just consistently always updating the hiring manager and the team also
Mhm.
on what's going on with the candidates, when are the next interviews happening, what feedback do we need to get to make sure that we can inform the candidate in a timely manner. So I would say communication is the number one important thing. And I think drawing from that, it's how often should you catch up with the hiring managers. So there are a few hiring managers where I've spoken to where they maybe like to catch up maybe once a week.
Mhm.
Maybe some want to catch up every single day, depending on how many applications you get for a particular position. So I know, for example, when I'm working in tech, I noticed that senior QA, there's a very large volume there. I know DevOps. I think in the past we had a lot of applications through there. Web designing, I was in charge of one of those, and there was like significant volume there. So when you have a lot of volumes of applications, sometimes you need to catch up with the hiring manager on a daily basis because you have to tag them on screenings, screening the CV, what I meant to say, and making sure that they move forward in a timely manner, especially if you see a person that would be on paper absolutely brilliant. So it's good
Yeah.
to inform that as soon as possible. I would say the second part with that is making sure that, kind of drawing from the communication, but I think this could also be a separate topic, is making sure that there is a process in place, that everybody is on the same page, and that everybody just knows what their job is entailing. So what I mean by that is I would say it's good to develop a sheet or a worksheet, basically mentioning all the important information that the hiring manager would like to have for this particular positions. So basically a job description along with, who would this hiring manager like for the people to be participating in.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can partner with that with the talent acquisition manager to decide who would like to be part of what, making sure that there's a healthy rotation in place. So that way, one person isn't getting bombarded with a lot of interviews within a
Yeah,
week. So I think,
productivity will drop dramatically otherwise.
oh my gosh, it's good to establish the hiring manager, but then also having maybe 3 or 4 different team members, so that way everybody has a healthy amount of work. But it does depend on how big the team is, if it's big or small, and then that could be discussed more in depth. So I think it's good to have a designated sheet in place. Actually, what I've done in the past is creating a hiring page, basically, where it includes the job description and includes who is participating in what,
Mhm.
also the experience, the steps that we're taking. So I would be in charge of the first step, which is screenings, the first interviews, basically, and then we would decide on what would be the next steps. That could be a hiring manager call, it could be a challenge, and then afterwards there would be like a team interview or a challenge and whatnot. And I think it's good to really have all those processes in place, so that way, obviously, the hiring manager knows what's going on, the team members know what's going on, the talent acquisition manager knows what's going on, and obviously, like I mentioned before, what the candidate knows. And I think it's good to include those processes not just within the team itself, but also on the job description, so that way candidates know ahead of time, okay, this is the process, these are what the steps are going to be happening, and everyone's just in a very good place. And the third thing that I would include on that, Eden, is also having just being open and transparent about the process. Maybe that could also fall under communication, but I think this is like a separate thing, just personality wise and the relationship. I think it's good to be absolutely transparent with the hiring manager, whether it's good news or bad news. Now, there are times where you will not see a lot of applications with a specific position. That can mean sometimes if the job description isn't as clear as what we would like it to, so you really have to go back to the drawing board there. I think it's good that it's better to discuss all this information before the job description is actually published, but there are times where maybe there's something that we didn't see last time, so it's good to address it as soon as possible if we do come across those types of things on the job description. So there's not a lot of applications that happen, or maybe we're not getting enough applications on what the hiring manager is looking for. So maybe, the experience isn't what we're looking for. Maybe the person is a little bit too junior, too senior. And, we just need to really kind of take a step back and really figure out, why do we not have enough applications? Do we need to do active sourcing? Do we need to change the job description, as I mentioned before? Do we need to work with headhunters or publish it on specific job boards that some people
Yeah,
may not even have thought about? There's a lot of job boards out there that people don't use as much, or they don't even know about. So there's a lot of information that a lot of job boards out there that people can use, and there can be what's the word? There could be, other people that may not have LinkedIn but are present on those job boards, and they
definitely.
may not know about this opportunity. So it's good to be transparent about what's going on, but it's also to be, as I mentioned, or as you mentioned on my LinkedIn, to be empathetic with the hiring manager on, the process. Things could take a little bit longer than used to, and we're all human. So I think it's also good to really go into that when working with hiring managers. And, it's not always going to be perfect. I have always seen on LinkedIn and also myself that there's really no such thing as a perfect candidate. So it's good to address that with the hiring managers, I think, as soon as possible. There's always things that people can learn. And there's stuff that the hiring manager or the team never even thought about looking into, but this person has that knowledge. And you think, oh my gosh, we never even thought about looking into this or using this specific skill. So I think that's very important to use these 3 points and go into that when fostering a really good and healthy hiring manager relationship.
So clear-cut communication, transparency throughout, and processes that work. And that triad, I wholeheartedly agree, by the way. Coming from the external side, there's some things I can get away with and some things I can't. I introduced myself to hiring managers. I'm like Marmite. So you're either going to love working with me or you're going to hate it. And if you hate it, then we just pull the parachute and we go our separate ways. It's a lot easier for me to do that. Touch wood, it doesn't happen often. But I think also, it just comes down to we are the specialists. Internal excellence doesn't matter, but we are the talent specialists, and hiring managers need to respect that. They don't always, and obviously we'll come to that when we come with difficult hiring managers and how we can get them onto our side and things like that. But if you just go into every process with strong, clear communication, transparency, and the process that aligns, if you don't make the hire or you don't have people, then there's not really much more we can do other than just keep iterating, keep trying. If you don't, as I say, if you're not transparent with your feedback, you're not sharing that the market's not producing anyone, or you're getting feedback from candidates and you're not passing that on, then that's on us. That's an internal talent acquisition or an external, whatever it is you want to call it. That's an us problem, not the hiring manager problem. We need to let go of that. So I completely agree.
Yeah.
Why is it important then? I agree with you, and everyone hopefully listening is sitting there going, like, nodding along as you're talking. But why is it even possible? Like, why is it even important? Sorry, to create these types of relationships with our hiring managers. Like, what's the benefits of actually doing it and working on them?
Absolutely. You have to remember that, especially with companies, they're always looking to hire, whether it's to replace somebody or to create an entirely new position. So that means you are most likely going to have to work with that hiring manager again. So it's really good for talent acquisition managers or recruiters to really say head on, this is a partnership. It should not be the hiring manager like this, which I'm indicating is all the way up here, and the recruiter or the talent acquisition manager is lower than that, or vice versa. It should be equal. It is a partnership. The talent acquisition manager or recruiter knows what's going on within the industry. They have their eyes and ears to the floor about what candidates are looking for with companies and what their expectations are. The hiring manager has their best knowledge of, for example, if it's a hiring manager working in tech, they have a lot of experience with leading people, the technology that they would like to see for that person. So everybody comes to the table with their own strengths, and it's good to work with those strengths together and not downplay them or to doubt one another. I mean, of course, it's always good to have a healthy debate with the hiring manager saying, I don't agree with that. Let's figure out a solution together so no one feels left alone there. So I think it's really good to have these healthy relationships because most likely you're going to have to work with that hiring manager again. So it's good to ideally have a first really good and healthy experience when hiring a person or persons together or people together for the first time. Because if you start off with not a very good hiring manager, I mean, of course, it can improve later on, but it makes it difficult when you have to hire another person together and the relationship is just not as strong as you would like it to be. Then that makes the hiring manager or the talent acquisition manager very uneasy, very nervous, thinking, oh gosh, I might have to work with this person again. So I think it's good to really address the concerns the responses, anything that, or the communication together as well too. I think it's really important to address that as early as possible, so that way there are no surprises when you're hiring for future positions with the hiring manager or the talent acquisition manager. How each person works together, and as I said before, there won't be any surprises when you have to hire together again. So I think it's good to put your best foot forward when hiring for the first time with the hiring manager, and then hopefully after that it will be much more easier, and there won't be any stress. Hopefully,
Hopefully. I like the fact you use the word partners, by the way, and
yeah,
there's a particular reason why I particularly like that word. Imperative partners, we put the word partners in there for a very particular reason as well. So
yeah,
that the whole reason this podcast exists is because there isn't an us versus them process with recruitment. We all support the company. Talent
yeah,
acquisition, internal and external, is always about supporting the company. We are partners with you, and we're partners with the hiring managers, and it doesn't matter. The whole purpose is to find who is right for the company. So I love the fact that you kind of enter that partnership. I keep saying the word partners now. Enter that relationship as an equal partnership. Um, you also you have broken down communication and processes
mm,
in the triad. You mentioned a few communication tools. You said
mm,
Slack, sorry, methods. You mentioned Slack, you mentioned emails, you mentioned obviously kind of check-ins, etc., etc. Who drives this? I know you're saying like
mm,
get it as early as possible, fine.
mm.
But I'm curious because obviously I can share how we do it after.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, what's the driver? How do you get it out? We've got a new requirement on. I'm the hiring manager, for example. Like, how are you going to create that process, or does that person create the process? What does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked at a few companies. Worked at one company where my manager at the time would say, "Okay, these are the upcoming positions that are coming up. Roslyn, you're going to be taking care of this. You're going to be taking care of these upcoming tech positions or design positions." And they said, and she would say, they are planning to, have this position ready yesterday, pretty much. So
Nice.
I was really in charge of starting off with writing a job description, and then eventually doing my research about what they are looking for with this particular position. Sometimes I would take other information from other positions, maybe that were somewhat similar to this new position, maybe copy and paste or maybe reword it. Obviously, doing my own research, as I mentioned before. And then, of course, after that job description is shared, I would then share it with the hiring manager and or maybe one or two additional team members, just to kind of get their input on what are we looking for. Is this realistic? Is this not realistic? And then bada bing, bada boom, the job description would be posted on there. So that was one way that we did it. Another way, at another company that I worked for, we had a designated sheet with all the positions that were
Mhm.
live and or were are going to be coming up in the future. And we would designate ourselves, myself, and the other recruiters or the talent acquisition manager who would be taking care of what positions. So we would know head
Mhm.
on who is in charge of what, even before the position is going live, even before the job description is even created. So we would know head on who was going to be in charge of that. Obviously, on the sheet, the hiring managers would be posting these positions. So we would either get this information from them and write it down ourselves, or the hiring manager would record that on that sheet. After that, I would say myself, because I like to identify myself as my go-getter, and I get pretty anxious when I don't address it head on. I go ahead and reach out to the hiring manager on when they would like to hire this person. Now, sometimes it wouldn't be for another month or so, because maybe the person that they are looking for it's like a replacement because the other person is leaving, so they want to make sure that that is all taken care of with that person that's leaving first before they move on to the job. Sometimes they want to start with it as soon as possible, or they just have a lot on their to-do list. So it could be a lot of different things, but we like to sit down, do an intake meeting, kind of just a rough outline on what they're looking for, what kind of technology expertise do they want to have, if they're senior, mid-level, when can they start, their salary expectations, all those important things. And most importantly, who would be involved in the process. So that would be more of an intake meeting. So I would really start that. There were times where some hiring managers wouldn't even, put their position on the list just yet. Sometimes they would approach one of us and say, hey, we're starting the process for this brand new position, or we're starting the process for a person that's leaving, but this is their replacement. Can you put this on the sheet, or can we start talking about that? So it's one of different things. So sometimes they would ignite it, and sometimes I would ignite it. So that's really where it all got started there, if that answers your question. That was a very long answer.
It does. It's interesting. So there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I'm curious because how you just described it. So you get the list of requirements, you go and do your research, you draft up a spec, and then we go and speak to the hiring team after.
The gathering the information first, that would be with the hiring manager. I would either draft up that job description, or sometimes they would like to take that responsibility for themselves and write up their own job description. And then they would ask me for my input, like, does this make sense? Does this sound realistic? So there was definitely a partnership even before the interview process, even with the job description. So either sometimes I would write it, sometimes the hiring manager would write it, and then they would get input from the team members, and we would go through all of this together. Now, sometimes these job descriptions were on just a regular Word document. I know a lot of people now are using Compliments. I find that to be an excellent tool for sharing things, because everyone has to have an account. And I think it's just much more clear to see things and to see other previous job descriptions that maybe you can use as kind of a guidance for the new job description and who wrote it. And also, it's good to identify obviously the job description and the people that are taking part of it, but I think it's also good to include the KPI of how long, how many candidates should be in each process as well. So for example, this would require the hiring manager and the talent acquisition manager to be really picky about, who are we really looking for? And so you can go from, having 30 applications to 15 applications in the first stage, and then that would minimize that to 10 and the hiring manager, and then it would just dim it down. So it's good to identify those numbers very earlier on, so that way people's calendars aren't getting overly crowded, that everybody's just on the same page of how many people should be part of each process. And I think when you have you identify those rough KPIs, it just makes it so much easier to say, this is what we're looking for, and this is not what we're looking for. So I think that's also good to keep that in mind when writing job descriptions, and or you're recording your data with the process, and also how long the candidates have been part of that. So it's good to really cover all those things as soon as possible.
The reason why I'm saying this is quite interesting, because obviously by the time a job description gets to me, and I've switched, the reason my arms anyone who's watching this, you just watch my arm flick around. It's because I've just loaded up our job description, our job intake form, sorry, not job description.
Yeah.
So an example, I got sent a CTO position yesterday. I don't look at the job spec before I speak to the hiring team, which sounds weird, right? Most people are thinking, you sound like an idiot. What are you doing? How can you go in and prepare?
Yeah.
I'm not interested in what the job description says. I'm interested in what you actually want. And I can tell you the fact that, and the reason why this works generally, is once I know the basic technologies of a particular company, the job description tells me nothing else other than boilerplate and, pardon my French, crap, generally. So the CTO requirement that I was sent, compared it to the one I wrote, they are completely different jobs, in my opinion. But the HR manager wrote one. And by the way, I am coaching her on how to improve it. She wrote one, and I wrote the other based on the actual intake. Because there's certain questions that you ask on that intake that should be on the spec. So it's just interesting to hear how other people do it. Like I said, it works for me, and that's why I'm Marmite. You like that process or you don't like that process. It goes both ways. But coming back to harmonize with hiring managers, I fully agree. Getting them brought in as early as possible by getting their input and
Yes.
then showing that level of professionalism to say, I think we should do it like this as well, or adding to the conversation or having a healthy debate. It removes any us versus them. It removes any I'm above you, I'm below you criteria. It's just, look, let's just cut through the noise. What do you want? You've listed 15 skills. Well, obviously, we're not looking for 15 skills. What do you want? We use candidate personas to do that. I don't know if you used one of those before.
What is it called again?
Candidate persona.
Candidate persona. No, that's actually rather new to me. I need to look into that after our chat. Sounds
To be
cool.
fair, most hiring teams don't use them. It
Hmm.
baffles me. I'll send you the document. I'll attach it to
Yeah,
this
please.
for anyone. So we made our own document for it, and it's essentially it's kind of like the intake call, but the intake call for me is like 35 questions around the whole team, the culture, the environment, vision, etc., etc. The candidate persona is actual person you want, not the job they're going to do, but the person you want. What
Yes.
industry do they come from? What level do they have? And they're two different documents to us. And then you combine the two and say, this is the most ideal candidate that you want. And then if we share that person and they say they're not right, we always have something to come back on and say, well, hang about, why are they not right? This is what you want, not this is what we think you want.
Yeah.
Again, that kind of comes back to that harmonization component where they can't, and a hiring manager cannot then complain to say you're delivering the wrong people, because we as talent acquisition specialists can sit and say, we've got documentation. We document everything because we need to when we go to market to remember everything because our minds are like mush.
Yeah, you
Um,
have to write everything down, or else, or people just kind of take it within their head and they don't write it. People are going to forget. Like, I'm a person that
100%.
has to write everything down, even on like a paper napkin if I don't have a piece of paper with me around.
Okay,
It's
I'm not that bad. That's mental. That's too far. That's joking. I mean, the communication component of weekly check-ins, daily check-ins, are you driving that with that hiring manager? Are you setting the standard on that?
Oh, sorry, one second. My cough was was a little bit too loud for
Oh,
that question. Do you mind
no, I was
rephrasing that?
saying, so you mentioned before about having weekly check-ins or daily check-ins. Is that coming from you and saying, I think we should do this, or is that coming from the hiring manager, or how does that time scale get set?
Absolutely. That usually, for me, that's usually identified within the intake meeting, or just a
Cool.
casual conversation if that wasn't mentioned in the intake meeting. That's usually something that I like to ask the hiring manager. And sometimes if they say, just throw a date in my calendar, I usually like to ask, do you prefer doing this on a weekly basis, or sometimes I've just kind of made the self decision to say, maybe let's do it on a bi-weekly basis. It
Yeah.
really just depends on how many people are part of the process and how much feedback is needed, etc. So this is really discussed with myself and with the hiring manager as early as possible. So as soon as the job description is set live, I automatically just start scheduling one-to-ones, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly. And for the most part, hiring managers have been really great about saying, just put something in my calendar, and if it really doesn't work, then we will reschedule it. So
Yeah.
knock on wood, that hasn't been too much of a problem there. It's been really good there. And so yeah, so I would schedule usually for me, I've noticed that bi-weekly one-to-ones I think work really well. I would schedule them on Fridays, just because it's kind of the end of the week, or Mondays to start the week. And I would usually schedule it for about maybe 30-45 minutes, occasionally an hour. It really just depends on the volume and how much is needed, and what is missing, what's going very well. And also occasionally, I haven't had experiences too much, and I don't know about other talent acquisition managers. Sometimes you get occasionally a hiring manager, but then a person right below that is shadowing that hiring
Mhm.
manager, so they can soon become a hiring manager. So sometimes you're occasionally working with two hiring managers to hear their feedback and, the best ways to do the process together. What is the screening process like with a brand new hiring manager? And how how does the ATS work? I know that's a big concern for a lot of especially new hiring managers is, oh my gosh, this applicant tracking system is extremely complicated. Please help me with doing this. And so it's really good to really just be a supportive, a lifeline for them, so they can just always go to you no matter what in case there's a problem or if something really good happens and they really like the candidate. So that's very important to note.
I think what works quite well, and again, taking our experience into this, Thursdays work the best for catch-ups for me. Is it
Mm,
Thursday mornings, ideally, Thursday afternoons, worst case? Because it means if anything needs to get actioned, I can still do it from the Friday. Obviously,
absolutely.
it gives me time to actually do something. I find if I do it Friday, sometimes it bleeds into the following week and you're losing 2 days for nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the flip side to that, doing weekly calls on a fresh relationship and then moving it to bi-weekly once you've got the handle on what you're looking for. So again, say it was a brand new client, a brand new role, I say client, brand new hiring manager, every week just to test, look, this is what I'm seeing on the market, this is the data, this is what people like about you, this is what people don't like about you, and giving that, again, come back to transparency, just giving everything. Then once, I'm saying to them, look, how do you feel we're doing with the profile, with the searches? Are we hitting the mark? Yep, you're good to go. Then we move it to bi-weekly
Mm,
until I feel that there's a need to bring it back into a weekly basis. Because then it gives
absolutely.
time to them. The last thing you want to be doing is just having catch-up calls when there's nothing to actually catch up, or if you don't feel like there's anything to catch up.
There's like say goodbye to those like 30, 45 minutes where
Exactly.
it's gone up. There's really nothing new to report. And sometimes hiring managers they want to know every single detail about what's going on, where's the job being published. And then there's some hiring managers that say it's good, I see all the
Do you get that
candidates.
often?
Sorry.
Do you get that often where they're really like involved and want to know everything and everywhere?
Definitely not never on a what is the word? Micro
Micromanagement?
micromanagement. There we go. Oh my gosh, it's Friday and the heat is frying my brain. Yes, micromanaging. Never on that basis, thank goodness. I think hiring managers because they do their main job all the time. I think with a lot of them, they really find recruitment fascinating. They really like seeing the processes that are happening. They really like being involved in meeting different people, and also with the team members that are also part of the hiring process. You sometimes just get very curious questions on sometimes how the
Mm,
ATS works or how many, is the job pool, diverse enough? Are we getting many different applications instead of just, one main application?
yeah.
I know for tech, it's, are we seeing a lot of men or are we seeing a lot of different people of different backgrounds there? Because I know that's definitely been very important, not only to myself, but to other companies and to other hiring managers as well. So you do see a lot of people that are and I've worked with hiring managers before that are just very generally interested in not just hiring the person as soon as possible, but also just very interested in the subject. So it's really cool to educate them on how it all works and who's in touch and best ways to give feedback, and doing interview trainings. I think is been one of the best things that I really started doing during my previous job, and that was really enlightening to me because some people don't know all this, what to do and what not to do in an interview with just a person. So I think that's very important to have, and people are curious. It's great to work with people that are very curious all the time.
Right, we'll talk about interview trainings while we're here.
Mm,
But just to wrap up those points, and the reason I emphasize communication, you can kind of bring in transparency into that same point, is
mm.
because, like I said, I genuinely believe that's what makes or breaks most hiring processes. Process is super important, don't get me wrong. And throughout what you've been sharing, there's a lot of touch points of processes. So hopefully people have been using pen, paper, or napkins to write everything down because there's so many things that they can put in
Yeah.
from that. But process can't happen without communication, and it
Mm,
cannot happen. Communication is just pure and simple the most important point of making a healthy
yes.
relationship, because it just springboards into everything else. But training. So training can come into two parts, right? So, well, three. We've got those who are eager, which you've just shared, those that are new, which also,
Mhm.
those also that are very difficult hiring managers. So I want to kind of break them down. We'll put the difficult to a moment because I really want to touch upon that separately. So
Sure.
when we're talking about training and doing it in an authentic way that's going to create a healthier relationship with our hiring managers, how can we go about and do that?
Mm. Well, I think it's the first thing, it's good to address it early on. Very much like communication, it's good to address these trainings head on. Now, I know some people maybe thinking, some are thinking, "Ugh, interview training, I already have enough to do throughout the
Yeah.
day. I don't know if I'm going to have time to sit down for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to do this interview training." But I think it is so important for not only just the hiring manager, but for the team members as well, especially those that have never done it before or maybe need a refresher on how it all works. I just think it's extremely important. Now, with interview trainings, you obviously go through the process of how everything's going to roll with this specific position. We've talked about the background, like how does this particular position come up before the job description is even created. We touch upon a little bit about different types of biases
Mhm.
that were part of the interview training as well. And obviously, just opening the floor for people's questions, concerns. There were people that asked really good questions that I didn't even think about including in the interview training that I eventually included there. And then after the interview trainings were done, we sent a feedback sheet at the end. We included a link in there, just really mentioning what could be done and what can be improved. And it was just absolutely amazing. And my previous coworker really jump started this even before I started my previous position. And then we just updated it as we went along. But I've never done interview trainings before I started there, and I absolutely loved doing it. It got me a chance to meet more people at the company. It gave us just more of a sense of a partnership together. It's really going over really the basic definition of what exactly my job is and what their opinions of that are. So I think it's really good to do these interview trainings as early as possible. I know we really did that basically right before or maybe a little bit after the job was published. So that way people are thoroughly prepared to do interviews right before before everything really kicks off. So I think it's just extremely important to go all over all those points together. And if there are people that happen to be sick or, they just don't have enough time, then we've gotten in the habit of recording the sessions, and then we would include
That's
them
good.
in the Slack channel or the main communication channel for everybody to have access to. Or maybe the person just was really confused or a little bit fuzzy about a certain part during the presentation, and they need to go back to refresh that information. So I think it's really important to record those sessions. So not only do you have it for the future, but you can also improve how your presentation skills are. And it's a great thing to do before releasing position, the new position. I think it's a great thing to be a part of.
How frequent are you doing that training
Oh
or
gosh.
conducting it?
So basically, anytime that we had a new position, we would do it. Now, sometimes people were part of another position process. And so, because they've already seen all the material that was shared, sometimes they would participate or they would
Yeah.
exit out because they've seen all this information before just last month. So, nothing
Yeah,
too
that's what
much
I'm
is
thinking. So
exact.
anytime a new job's gone live, you're giving it to the direct team or the people who are involved in that team, and if they can have the opportunity to access. Okay.
Exactly, especially if they've done it before.
I really like the frequency of that as well, and going to the harmonization component, because you mentioned people who maybe have never done hiring before, or kind of this is the first time they're part of a process. Realistically, most of those people will become hiring managers.
Yeah.
The vast majority aren't going to leave the company anytime soon. So you're also laying the foundations
Yes.
for future relationships. So when those people do become independent hiring managers, it's not a from scratch start the process. Who are you? What do you do? It's like, oh, you're the lady or the guy or whoever who consistently emailed me about training, and I went to some of the seminars and so on and so forth. So I really like that component because it makes future collaborations way easier.
Exactly. And there's some people that always ask questions, not just about the process, but also just really getting familiar with the ATS and really just how it works. Because with
Mm.
a lot of team members and basically eventually future hiring managers, they've really only done feedback scorecards. That was really the only extent of the ATS that, they really had access to. So
Mhm.
when they
Feedback
become hiring,
scorecards.
sorry.
The feedback scorecards. It brings me
Those
back some
feedback
bad memories.
scorecards.
Uh,
Oh my gosh, when during the interview training, we had like a designated area of just talking about feedback. I'm like, please submit your feedback. I had to
I
really
can
hone in on
can I
that.
opt out of those ones, please? No, I think feedback is super important. Don't get me wrong, but I
Oh
feel like
yes.
feedback scorecards. I've received some where it's like yes, no, and I'm like, no, that's not feedback. That's just one word answer. Give me why it was a yes. Give me why it was a no. I was like, you spent an hour and a half with that person. Give me something,
Give me
please.
And I don't want to see just one or two sentences. And I really hone in on that with my hiring managers and with the team members. I'm like, please remember to write things down. Now you have to remember that if you're writing things down, just let the candidate know, like, hey, I'm going to be looking at this area, just writing things down, or you might see some typing going on in the
Yeah.
background, just jotting down this particular information, and having set questions in place, I think is really important as well. And so it's just good to jot everything down. And I think it's also good to remember to take a step back, save all your information first, but take a step back, really try to remember what the conversation was about. Try not to let your bias get in the way of it, but like, what did this person actually say? And really quote it word for word, and describe, would this help us, the team, in the future, or will it not help the team in the future?
Mhm.
So it's really good to take a step back, come back to it with a fresh perspective. I always tell the team and especially the hiring manager that, so that way they can really go into it and really give a thorough and honest yes or no, and then that could be some of the feedback that I can share with them to help the candidate in the future, whether we want to proceed with them or not. So
Yeah.
I think it's really good to hone in on that.
The last point I wanna touch upon
Mm,
is difficult hiring managers. We've all dealt with them. Don't get me wrong.
mm,
Friction has happened
of course.
through it ourselves, through it them. We're talking about the talent acquisition side. Of course, we're always taking responsibility for our part, but it's not always us. Let's be honest.
Mm,
So if we're dealing with difficult hiring managers, what can we do to try to create that harmonious relationship with them?
absolutely. The first thing that comes to my mind is we are all human. We all get busy with our jobs and with our life. So there are times where sometimes I've experienced where the hiring manager just doesn't get back to me as soon as possible. And I always take a step back and I say, well, they have a very busy day ahead of them. I'm going to take, a couple of hours, work on other things, and eventually they usually always get back to you. But there are times where sometimes people would look at a message and they said, "Okay, I'll get back to them as soon as possible." But then something else happens, and then before you know it, the day is gone. So what I try to do is I set some time in the morning to follow up with the hiring manager, And if they are not responsive, I kind of wait maybe 1 or 2 hours, depending on how the day is going, and I touch base with them. And usually when I do kind of the second and sometimes third attempt, they usually respond back. And I usually say, look, I understand that you are busy, but, as we both have talked about, we need to hire this person as soon as possible. And I'm worried that if we keep this candidate waiting, whether it's been since yesterday, and sometimes there have been some people that were in the process for a week, and that's a big no-no on my side. And I'm sure other talent acquisition managers can follow up
Yep.
with it. And I'm sure you have experience that Eden is. We cannot let
Ah,
candidate wait for a very long time. So I really emphasize that. And when I emphasize that with the hiring managers, it really clicks with them because everyone's been part of the process before. Everyone's been the candidate before. And so when you humanize it, you don't want to come across as like the hiring manager's parent, your partners, or you want to be human with them, but at the same time, you have a job to do. Everybody has a job to do. And it's important to address that, to be empathetic, but to also be transparent and honest with them about it. So if you're dealing with a hiring manager that maybe is a little bit difficult or is picky or just really isn't responsive, you just have to keep communicating with them. If you are in the office with them, you go and you just approach them in person. It might be uncomfortable, but you say, hey, can we have 5 minutes to grab, a cup of coffee? If they are pretty good with responsiveness, but they are extremely delayed with giving feedback, I always advise hiring managers, especially in the kickoff and the interview training, to designate 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes per morning or once a week or whatnot to give feedback to the candidates, whether it's in the screening process or in the later interview stages. Because if they set time in their calendars to really review applications and to get back to candidates, then it's so much more organized, and it makes you feel like you don't have to keep following up with them all the
yeah.
time if they're really, not being as active as you would like them to be. And it's just good to be honest with that. So, for example, if eventually you finally get your person in the team, I think it's also really important to do retrospectives with the hiring manager and with the team. And what I mean by that is having a designated board, like a whiteboard or a mirror board. I know everyone's doing a lot of mirror boards these days because it's always very visually appealing. To really sit down with the team, with the hiring manager, and go over what went well, what we would like to get rid of, what can we improve, and what are the action points for the next time we need to hire this particular position or a similar position. And I think it's good to involve the hiring manager in that, so that way they can really take a look at what they were doing during the process, and they can say, yeah, I was a little bit slow with responding to these messages or this follow-up feedback, and an action point for me would be setting up calendar reminders or just really making sure that I have designated amount of time to get back to people and to make sure that I'm not losing my communication with the talent acquisition manager and with the team. So I think retros are really good to kind of take a glance back from a bird's eye
Yeah.
view, and that would make the hiring manager more reflective on their part. So that way you're not feeling like you were going after them all the time, but it's making them think, okay, I can always work on this.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to do that.
And I think those check-in calls should help along the way. And
Yes.
they're signals for talent teams. If someone keeps moving meetings and they're not giving feedback or they're delaying feedback, then we have to take a step back and say, clearly this isn't an important requirement. And that would be kind of my message to them and say, look, life happens, we get it. Things are
Yeah.
busy. You might have a release, something's broken, personal situation, whatever, right? Is this still a priority? Yes, it is. Well, then let's get back on track. Let's get
Yes.
another call booked in. Let's re-kick off, start from there. Sometimes that's enough. As you say, sometimes you're still dealing with difficult hiring managers throughout. The
Mm.
retrospective point I really like. I don't do it as frequently as I would like to because sometimes they don't want to hear. But one thing that I have worked out quite well is instead of associating a person with a step, we just give the data. And then, for example, we would say this: how many CVs were submitted. From CV submission to feedback was this time frame, from feedback to arranging. So we'll find all that from our own submissions, right? Of course, there's going to be more that will have from their own side. And then I'll basically sit down with the hiring manager or the team and say, okay, who was responsible for this? Who was responsible for this part? And without saying Eden did this and Eden was wrong, it quickly connects, and the hiring manager sitting there like, oh no. And like, because you can see a glaringly big, a glaring obvious mistake where it's like, okay, the CV feedback to arranging the first interview might have been 6 days. That's on talent scheduling, but to get the feedback might be 10 days, and that's on the hiring manager. So then that's without pointing fingers at each other. You can make them realize without saying it's your fault. And of course, as I say, life gets in the way sometimes, anyways.
You have the receipts. It's important to save the quote air quotes as I'm saying the receipts, so that way so that way you can always look back and say, okay, we really need to minimize this, days to hire number. We had this position open for 3+ months. What went wrong there? What can we improve? And there's always something to improve. And it's good to be open about that.
And on that point, we will leave it there. So thank you so much for taking the time for sharing your thoughts, and especially for bringing a topic that, like I said at the beginning, I genuinely think it is such a important cornerstone to what we're doing. So obviously for yourself, there is so much more that you can talk about, I'm sure, and obviously happy to connect with people. So where can people find you to continue the conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again, Eden. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always present there. It's one of my favorite social media platforms. And occasionally I like to post things that I observe as a person, as a talent acquisition manager, so people can find me there.
Perfect. And I will put that, your LinkedIn bio or URL, that's what it's called, not a bio, in the footnotes of this. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eden. It's been such a pleasure doing a deep dive about relationships with the hiring managers and with the team. I really appreciate your time.